I never saw it coming. The warning signs had been there, of course, but I was too blind to see them, too complacent in the life we had built together to recognize the cracks that were forming underneath. The first time it happened, I didn't even notice. It was just a passing remark, a strange tone in her voice. But over time, those little things began to add up. The coldness, the distance. And when it finally hit me, it was already too late. Catherine had always been the center of my world. When we met, it felt like fate. She was everything I had ever wanted. A beautiful, strong, intelligent woman who had her life together in ways I never could have imagined. I was captivated from the start, and I think she saw something in me too. First, it was like a fairy tale. We were in love, building a life together, raising a family. It felt like we had everything. 2 kids, a house, careers, and each other. What more could we want? But the truth is, we wanted more than we realized. We both did. And we didn't even know it until it was too late. In the beginning, our relationship was full of excitement, passion, and hope. But as the years passed, something shifted. Catherine changed, and so did I. I was so focused on being the provider, on keeping everything together for the sake of our family, that I didn't notice the slow erosion of our connection. It wasn't a single, dramatic event that tore us apart. It was the small, quiet moments, the unspoken words, the missed opportunities for closeness. I told myself it was just life getting in the way. Work, the kids, responsibilities, it was all overwhelming. But I never realized that I was losing her until it was too late. Catherine became more distant. At first, it was just the little things. A late night at the office, a weekend getaway with friends, the long hours she would spend on her phone, texting, or on calls. I didn't think anything of it. I trusted her. After all, we had built this life together, and trust was the foundation of everything. But the more I tried to ignore the growing distance between us, the more I realized that something was wrong. The first time she didn't come home after work, I told myself it was just a late meeting. But the next time, I started to feel uneasy. It wasn't like her to stay out late without calling or letting me know. When I asked her about it, she was dismissive, brushing it off like it was no big deal. I let it slide, convinced that I was overreacting. But deep down, I felt it, the gnawing sensation that something was off. Then, one evening, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, her face pale. I asked her what was going on, but she didn't respond right away. It was like she hadn't even heard me. Her mind was somewhere else. For a moment, I felt completely invisible. It was like she was in another world, one where I didn't belong. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to mask the fear creeping into my voice. She looked up at me then, as if she had just snapped out of some trance. There was a moment of silence, her eyes searching mine for something. Answers, maybe, or forgiveness. But I couldn't read her. She was hiding something, and I didn't know if I was ready to find out what it was. "I'm fine," she said, too quickly. It wasn't the truth, I could tell that much. But she wasn't going to say anything more. She never did. Over the next few days, I began to notice how things were unraveling between us. The physical distance had always been a problem, but now the emotional distance was unbearable. Catherine was no longer the woman I had married, the woman who used to laugh at my stupid jokes or hold my hand during movies. Now, when I reached for her, she pulled away. Her affection had turned cold, like she was no longer invested in me, in us. She was shutting me out, and I didn't know why. It felt like I was losing her, but I had no idea how to get her back. I started questioning everything we had built together, every moment we had shared. Was this just a phase? Or had something been brewing under the surface for longer than I realized? I couldn't tell if I was imagining it all or if it was truly happening. But the truth was, no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I could feel it. This invisible wall between us, getting thicker with each passing day. And then, on the evening of our 10th wedding anniversary, everything changed. I had planned the evening carefully, hoping to reconnect with her. We were supposed to have dinner at our favorite restaurant, the one where we had gone on our first date. I even got her a gift, a necklace with a small pendant that read, "Forever." A reminder of the promises we had made all those years ago. I was nervous, But I hoped that this gesture would remind her of the love we once shared. I had hopes, even if they were small and fragile. But when I arrived home, something was off. The house was quiet, too quiet. Catherine wasn't there. She had left me a note, just a few short sentences, written in her familiar handwriting. "I'm sorry. I just can't do this anymore. I need space. Please don't follow me." At that moment, I felt like the world had been ripped out from underneath me. I stood there, staring at the note in disbelief, as a sinking feeling spread through my chest. I wanted to run after her, to beg her to come back, to tell her I would do anything to fix things. But something stopped me. Something inside me told me that chasing her was no longer an option. I sank into the couch, the weight of the note heavy in my hands. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving me with nothing but my thoughts and my fears. How could she do this? How could she just walk away without any explanation? It wasn't like her. The worst part was that she had already made up her mind. I could feel it. She had already decided to leave. The silence in the house was deafening. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, the gnawing emptiness that had taken root in my chest. I had been betrayed, in a way that felt so quiet, so insidious, that I wasn't even sure how to react. This wasn't the kind of betrayal you could scream about. There were no physical signs, no obvious injuries, just a slow, steady erosion of trust. I couldn't help but wonder how long she had been planning this, how long she had been feeling this way. Had she been distancing herself for weeks, for months? Or was this something that had just happened, something she had only just realized? Either way, I was left standing there, alone, with nothing but the cold, empty space she had left behind. But the worst part wasn't the absence of her. It was the unanswered question. Why? What had happened to us? Where had I gone wrong? What could I have done differently? But that was just the beginning. The storm had barely started. I didn't know it then, but in that moment, my life was about to change in ways I couldn't have possibly imagined. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built a family with, had already made her choice. And I would soon find out exactly how far she was willing to go to break everything we had built. It wasn't until later that night when everything came crashing down. I had checked her phone, hoping to find something. Anything that could explain her absence. She left it behind on the kitchen counter. A part of me hesitated, but another part of me was desperate to understand what had happened. As I scrolled through her messages, I stumbled upon something I wasn't prepared for. A conversation, one that made my stomach drop. The words were unmistakable, too clear to be mistaken for anything else. She was seeing someone else. I don't even know why I was shocked. Maybe I had already known deep down. Maybe I had been too blind to admit it to myself. The images were all there, right in front of me. Pictures of them together, laughing, touching. I felt sick. My whole world felt like it was falling apart. She had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and I had been too naive to see it. Her betrayal wasn't just physical. It was emotional, too. I had given her everything. My heart, my soul, and she had taken it all and thrown it away without a second thought. The anger bubbled inside me, but it wasn't just anger anymore. It was a cold, numbing rage that made me want to disappear from the world entirely. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. It was no longer a home. It was a prison, a reminder of everything I had lost. I needed to get away. I needed to find a way to make her feel the pain I was feeling. When she finally came home, it was like nothing had changed. She walked in the door, barely acknowledging me, as if nothing was wrong. She didn't even look at me, and in that moment, I felt the weight of it all. I confronted her, my voice shaking with anger. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to hold back tears. "Who is he?" She didn't even flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't offer any explanation. Instead, she just shrugged. "It's not what you think," she said. "I needed space. I didn't ask for this, James." I felt my world crashing down in that instant. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew. And yet, she stood there, unashamed, as if the destruction of everything we had built didn't matter. I wanted to scream, to throw everything in her face, but something inside me held me back. Maybe it was the last remnants of the man I used to be, the man who had loved her, trusted her. But deep down, I knew this was it. I couldn't take this anymore. I couldn't stay with someone who treated me like this, who was capable of destroying everything without a second thought. So I made a decision that would change everything. It was late that night when I made the final decision. I knew I couldn't keep living in this house, pretending everything was normal when nothing felt right. Catherine was gone again, but this time I wasn't waiting around for her to return. I packed a bag, grabbed the kids, and slipped out quietly, as if it were any other night. But this was far from ordinary. This was the beginning of something I couldn't undo. I had already called my brother, telling him we were leaving. He didn't ask questions, just told me to get somewhere safe. As I drove away, the reality of it hit me like a freight train. I was leaving behind everything I had ever known. My home, my life, my wife. But more than that, I was leaving behind the idea of who I thought I was. The man who would endure betrayal, who would stay and fight for a family. I was no longer that man. The kids were asleep in the back seat, their innocent faces unaware of the storm I had just set in motion. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. They deserved better than this. They didn't deserve to grow up in a broken home. But this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about me, about reclaiming my life. By the time we reached my brother's place, it was already past midnight. We didn't talk much, just settled in for the night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of my choices pressing down on me. I kept replaying the last conversation I had with Catherine in my head, trying to make sense of her words, her indifference. But there was no logic to it, no reasoning that could explain what had happened. She had chosen someone else, someone who wasn't me. And there was nothing I could do to change that. The house felt foreign now. The place that once held so many memories. Our first home, the room where we brought our children into the world, was gone. It no longer mattered. I was free. Or at least that's what I told myself. But I knew deep down that freedom came at a cost. The days that followed were a blur. I found myself sinking deeper into my own thoughts, lost in a void of emotions I couldn't name. I had never been good at dealing with grief, but this was something different. This wasn't just about losing Catherine. It was about the entire life I had built with her, the dreams we had shared. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of regret and bitterness, and no matter how much I tried to swim to shore, the waves kept pulling me back under. The kids tried to adjust, but they could sense the tension. I did my best to hide my emotions from them, but it was impossible. They weren't stupid, they could feel the change in the air. I tried to keep things normal for their sake, taking them to the park, making dinner, but inside, I was falling apart. I hadn't realized how much of my identity had been tied to Catherine and the family we had been. Without them, I didn't know who I was anymore. As the days turned into weeks, I started to feel the weight of my decisions. Leaving was supposed to be the first step in reclaiming my life, but instead, it felt like I had ripped everything apart for nothing. I couldn't escape the anger, the hurt, the betrayal. They followed me everywhere I went, lurking in the corners of my mind, reminding me of everything I had lost. One evening, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the empty space where Catherine's things used to be. Her absence was suffocating, like a presence that still haunted the house, even though she was gone. I could almost hear her voice, feel the coldness in her touch. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me, about what I was going to do with the wreckage she left behind. I had to get revenge, not just for me but for the kids too. They didn't deserve to grow up thinking this was what love was supposed to look like. I had to make her feel what I felt. The hurt, the anger, the betrayal. She had ruined my life, and now it was time for her to pay. I didn't waste any more time. I moved to a new city, a place where no one knew me, a place where I could rebuild without the constant reminders of the life I had left behind. My brother helped me find a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was mine. A clean slate. The kids were adjusting better than I expected. They didn't understand fully why we had to leave, but they trusted me, and that was all I needed. I became more focused, more determined. The pain of betrayal was still fresh, but I buried it under a new sense of purpose. I had to start over, and I wasn't going to let Catherine get away with what she had done. Every day, I went to work, trying to keep things as normal as possible. But in the back of my mind, the plan was forming. The idea of revenge consumed me. I began researching everything: how to ruin someone's life, how to make them suffer the way I had. I wasn't just looking to hurt her emotionally. I was looking to destroy the life she had built. I wanted her to feel what it was like to lose everything. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me, about reclaiming my dignity, my sense of self-worth. I had let her walk all over me for too long, and now I was going to make her pay. I started gathering information on the man she had been seeing. I found out everything about him, the type of work he did, where he lived, everything. It wasn't hard. She had trusted me once, and in doing so, she had left me with all the tools I needed to break her down. The decision had been made. The anger that had been festering inside me for weeks was now a sharp, cutting force, driving me forward. I didn't care about the cost anymore. I didn't care about the consequences. Catherine had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now it was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. I started by digging deeper into the life of the man she was with, this stranger who had taken her away from me. His name was Eric, a name that would now be synonymous with everything I hated. He wasn't anything special, just another man who took what wasn't his. He worked in finance, had a modest apartment, and seemed to live a fairly predictable life. But I didn't need to know much about him. I didn't care about him, not really. What mattered was what he had done to me, what he had taken from me. My plan was simple, subtle. I would slowly unravel his life, make his world as unstable and uncertain as mine had become. It wasn't enough to just ruin Catherine's life. I needed to make sure she understood that she would lose everything. She would feel the sting of abandonment, of betrayal, just as I had. I started by following Eric, watching his every move. I parked across the street from his apartment, observing him like a ghost. It wasn't even about catching him doing anything wrong. It was about making him aware that he was being watched. I wanted him to feel the pressure, the paranoia. I wanted him to know that he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. Weeks passed as I observed, gathering information. But as much as I watched, I began to realize something that sent a chill through my bones. This wasn't just about Eric anymore. This was bigger than him. This was about Catherine, about the life we had built together, about the promises she had broken. Every action I took now was a message to her, a message that she would never forget. Then I started making subtle moves. I sent anonymous tips to his workplace, detailing his behavior, hinting at potential ethical breaches. Nothing huge, just enough to make him look bad. I couldn't outright ruin his career, at least not yet, but I could plant the seed of doubt in his mind. And that's what I did. Each day, the little things added up, creating a perfect storm of uncertainty in his life. I knew Catherine would eventually catch wind of this. She had to. She would notice the change in Eric's behavior, the sudden tension, the unspoken questions. But that's when the real game would begin. That's when I would strike the final blow. But something strange began to happen as I carried out my plan. The anger that had once consumed me began to evolve into something else. A cold, calculating detachment. It was as if the anger had given way to a numbness, an almost clinical approach to the situation. I wasn't angry anymore. I was indifferent. I had crossed the line from seeking justice to simply seeking destruction. And in doing so, I had lost a part of myself I didn't even realize was gone. Catherine finally noticed the changes. It wasn't obvious at first. She tried to ignore the growing tension in her life, the whispers behind her back, the subtle shifts in her world. But eventually it became impossible to deny. She called me one night, her voice trembling as she tried to sound calm, but I could hear the panic underneath. She asked what I had done. She demanded to know why Eric's life was suddenly falling apart. I didn't answer her right away. I let the silence hang between us, just as she had left me in silence for so long. The weight of it pressed down on me, and for a moment, I considered telling her the truth. I considered telling her what I had done, what I was doing. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I spoke slowly, calmly. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice steady. But inside, I was anything but calm. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to remain in control. "Maybe you should take a good look at the choices you've made." Her voice cracked. "James, please. This isn't fair." "Life isn't fair, Catherine," I replied, cutting her off. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you destroyed everything." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end, trying to process the words. She wasn't used to hearing this from me. For so long, I had been the one trying to keep everything together, trying to fix things. But now I was letting the pieces fall where they may. She had broken me, and now I was going to break her. "You don't have to do this," she said, almost pleading. "We can fix this, James. We can make it work." But I knew it was too late for that. There was no going back. There was no fixing this. She had chosen her path, and now I was choosing mine. I wasn't the same man who had loved her so blindly. I was someone different now, someone forged in the flames of betrayal and anger. "You don't get it, do you?" I asked, my voice low. "There's nothing to fix. You've already ruined everything." The call ended with her begging for my forgiveness, but I didn't want to hear it. The words felt hollow, empty. She had had her chance, and now she had to deal with the consequences. There was no turning back for either of us. As the weeks passed, I found myself slipping further and further into a state of emotional numbness. I wasn't sure when the anger had turned into something else, something darker, something colder. But it had, and now I was faced with a reality I wasn't prepared for. I had started this quest for revenge with a clear purpose, to make Catherine feel the pain I had felt. But somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of that purpose. The things I had done, manipulating Eric's career, watching his every move, carefully orchestrating Catherine's emotional downfall, had taken a toll on me. I could feel the weight of it. I could feel myself becoming someone I didn't recognize. The man I had once been, the man who loved and trusted, was no longer there. I had become a shadow of myself, driven by the need for retribution, but devoid of any real emotion beyond cold calculation. And that's when I realized something that shook me to my core. I didn't want to be this person. I didn't want to continue down this path. I had started this journey seeking justice, but now I was simply feeding into my own darkness. I had become the very thing I hated, the very thing that had hurt me in the first place. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep hurting people just to soothe my own pain. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. And so I made a decision. I had to stop. I had to break free from the grip of vengeance before it consumed me completely. The cafe was small, tucked away on a quiet street in a part of the city that neither of us had frequented before. It felt like the perfect place for the kind of conversation we needed to have. Somewhere neutral, somewhere devoid of any past memories. It was as if we had both agreed, subconsciously, to meet in a place where we weren't weighed down by history. But the weight of what had happened between us hung between us in the silence before I even sat down. Catherine was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, looking fragile in the dim light, almost as if she had been waiting for me forever. Her blonde hair, usually so perfectly styled, was a little out of place, damp from the rain that had been falling outside. She was wearing a black dress, but it looked out of place here, in this rundown cafe. I could tell she had tried to dress up for me, to make it feel like old times, but it wasn't working. I had already moved past that version of us. The us that she still saw in her mind wasn't the same as the one I had already buried. I sat down, taking a long breath, and stared at her for a moment. She seemed to shrink under my gaze, unsure of what to say. Her eyes were swollen, red from crying, but she quickly wiped away any traces of tears before I could notice. I didn't want to say anything harsh right away. I wanted to make her feel the weight of everything, to let the silence speak for me. She shifted in her seat, nervously tapping her fingers on the coffee cup in front of her. I could feel her heart beating faster, as if she expected me to lash out, to scream at her like I had done in the past. But I didn't. Instead, I looked at her like she was a stranger, and in many ways she was. "How are you, James?" she finally asked, her voice tentative, almost fragile. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't find the words. How could I? After everything, how could I possibly explain the tumult of emotions swirling inside of me? There was still a lingering part of me that missed her, the woman I once thought I knew. But that woman was gone. What was left of her now was just a memory, tainted by everything she had done. "I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice flat. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. I was far from fine, but I wasn't going to let her see how much I was still hurting. "I've been doing okay. It's been a strange few weeks, but I'm getting by." She nodded slowly, trying to meet my gaze, but she couldn't hold it. She looked down at the table instead, her hands gripping the edge of her coffee cup. "James, she started, but I cut her off, my patience wearing thin. "Don't," I said, my voice hard. "Don't even try to explain. I've heard it all before." She flinched, and for a brief moment, I saw the old Catherine, the woman who used to care, who once fought for us. But that woman was gone. I had to remind myself of that. The woman who had been unfaithful, the woman who had betrayed me so deeply, was a stranger now. "I'm not here to apologize, James," she said quietly. "I just want to talk. I need you to understand that what happened, it wasn't supposed to happen this way." She reached across the table, her fingers trembling slightly. She was trying to hold on to something, anything that could bring us back to where we once were. But there was no going back. I could see the desperation in her eyes, but I couldn't allow myself to fall for it again. I couldn't afford to. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, leaning forward. "This isn't about us anymore. You can't just take everything we had and throw it away like it meant nothing. You don't get to apologize now. You don't get to come back and pretend like nothing happened. You broke me, Catherine. You broke our family." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't look away. Couldn't. She needed to feel the full weight of what she had done, to understand that the destruction she had caused wasn't something I could easily forgive. "I didn't want this to happen," she whispered, almost pleading. "I didn't want to hurt you. I love you, James. I still do." But her words were hollow. The love she spoke of was gone, swallowed up by her actions, by the way she had abandoned me for someone else. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to say that. Not anymore. You made your choice, Catherine. You walked away from me, and I'm not going to be the one sitting here pretending like we can fix this. We can't. It's over." There was a long silence, and for the first time, I saw something different in her eyes. Something like realization. She knew it was too late, just as I did. The past was gone. There was no rebuilding, no turning back the clock. She didn't fight anymore. She didn't beg. She just sat there, defeated, her shoulders slumped, like she had finally accepted the truth. "Goodbye, Catherine," I said quietly. "I hope you find what you're looking for. But it won't be with me." I stood up then, not waiting for her response. I didn't need it. I had already made my peace with the situation. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange sense of closure. The anger had dissolved into something else. Something calm, something final. I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. The future was mine, and I was ready to face it no matter what. The weeks that followed were the hardest, yet the most liberating of my life. I moved forward in ways I hadn't expected, navigating the new normal with a sense of purpose. I spent time with the kids, focusing on them and on myself. I had spent so many years lost in the past, clinging to a life that was no longer mine. Now, I was determined to rebuild from the ashes. But rebuilding was never easy. There were moments when I found myself thinking about Catherine, about what we could have had. But those thoughts were brief and fleeting. I couldn't afford to dwell on them. She had made her choice and I had made mine. There were days when I still felt the weight of the betrayal, when the memories of her touch, of the life we had built together, would hit me like a wave. But I realized that these memories were no longer mine to carry. They were part of a life that had ended, a chapter that was closed. I kept telling myself that I was stronger now, that I had learned something valuable from all of this. But in truth, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if I could ever fully heal from the damage she had done. I wasn't sure if I would ever trust anyone the same way again. I did, however, start to forgive myself. That was the hardest part. I had spent so much time blaming myself, thinking I was the one who had somehow failed. But the truth was, I had done everything I could. I had loved her, fought for her, and tried to make it work. I had given her everything, and it wasn't enough. For a long time, I thought I needed revenge to heal. But what I learned was that revenge only chained me to the past, to the bitterness, to the pain. What I needed was freedom, and that was something I could only give myself. So I made the final choice, the choice to move forward, the choice to let go of the past, even if it meant leaving behind a piece of myself. And as I looked out at the future, I felt a quiet hope stirring inside me. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was mine. And that was enough. What would you have done in my shoes? Could you forgive the betrayal and move on? Or would you have sought revenge? Let me know in the comments. Your stories matter, and I want to hear from you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos like this. And remember, no matter what you're going through, there's always hope for a new beginning.